Influencing popular culture, politics, and everything in between. The local station takes you ringside as we discuss the crazy world that is professional wrestling. This is Going Ringside with the local station.
Hello there, and thank you for joining us again for another episode of Going Ringside. This is episode 17. If you're watching us in order, thanks for continuing to support the show. As last week, episode 16, we did our first live show from River City Wrestling Con, which was an amazing success. By far the most highly viewed episode we've done so far. So thanks for all the support. Of course, give me a follow on Instagram or TikTok at Going Ringside. Putting a lot of exclusive content there daily, sometimes twice a day, about the wrestling and the fighting world, just so you can keep caught up with the day-to-day stuff that we may not get right here on the podcast. But if you check me out at Going Ringside at Instagram and TikTok, we're giving you updates every day that are sometimes big news. But today, it's not going to be all about wrestling. It's a lot about UFC and Ultimate Fighting. Because if you're watching this before Saturday the 24th, UFC is in Jacksonville, and we wanted to break down the fight. The main event, Josh Emmett, fifth in the world, versus Ilia Topuria, going to be on ABC, and they are going to broadcast it from Jacksonville, from the arena. One other person we're going to be talking to, and we're going to hear in this episode a little later on from Josh Emmett. Our own Justin Barney sat down and talked with him, and we're going to have that interview with Josh Emmett for you about his thoughts on coming to this fight in Jacksonville and how he thinks things will play out. Also, you know, UFC hasn't had a lot of NFL guys cross over into UFC. There's been some. Bob Sapp, Michael Westbrook, to an extent Brock Lesnar, but he's more known for pro wrestling, of course. But Austin Lane, a former Jacksonville Jaguar, is going to have his debut fight this Saturday, and we are going to hear from Austin Lane a little later on in the show. He's fighting Justin Tafa in a heavyweight bout, so this is a big thing for the former Jaguar turned UFC fighter, so we're going to hear from him a little later on. We will also sit down with sports editor Justin Barney here at News4Jax to go over this fight, Josh Emmett versus Ilia Topuria, and Austin Lane's debut, and get his thoughts on him. But first, we're going to talk to the mayor of Jacksonville, and I'll intro the mayor of Jacksonville, Lenny Curry, in just a moment. But we have a bonus interview at the end of this episode. We wanted to bring a local podcaster who's kind of taking Jacksonville by storm. The name of this podcast is Jenerally Sepaking. Now, generally, you think it's spelled with a G. This is spelled with a J. Jenerally Sepaking. It's a local podcast in Jacksonville that we wanted to have on to see what they're doing. And the host, Jennifer Janao, sits and talks to a lot of locals in Jacksonville. It's a great, growing podcast you might want to check out. So if you want to hear that interview, scroll to the end of this podcast. We're going to speak to Ms. Janao about the podcast, Jenerally Sepaking, later on in the show. So we got a packed show, but our big guest who we want to start out with is Jacksonville Mayor Lenny Curry. Now, if you're living in Jacksonville listening to this, you obviously know who Mayor Curry is. But if you don't, listen to this interview, even if you don't live around here, because it's important if you are a fan of UFC or pro wrestling or any sort of fighting sport, because he's about to leave office. He served 8 years in the Jacksonville area now, and he has spent a lot of time really fostering a relationship with different fighting organizations, like UFC, bringing the first big fight nationally televised with a large crowd during the height of the pandemic, when that was a big no-no. We're going to sit and talk to the mayor about that and what that meant for the city as far as really developing a relationship with UFC, which is why they're back here now. The same thing was going on across the parking lot from that UFC fight over at Daly's Place, which is connected to TIAA Bank Field, the Jaguars Stadium, when All Elite Wrestling, AEW, with Tony Khan, the Jaguars owner's son, Shad Khan's son, Tony, started All Elite Wrestling. All throughout the pandemic, when it was at its worst, they were doing weekly shows in Jacksonville while Curry was mayor. We want to talk to him about that, kind of what was going on behind the scenes there with the decision to have live pro wrestling in Jacksonville before even the UFC fights, with crowds. It was kind of a big deal to do that here. Jim Ross was on TV nationally each week broadcasting live and saying, "Welcome to Jacksonville." I talked to Jim about that in the past. He said we kind of were acting as the Chamber of Commerce for Jacksonville nationally on TNT each week by showing them that even during the height of the pandemic, we're having pro wrestling in Jacksonville, eventually with crowds. Before anyone else was doing crowds, there was no NBA, no NBA crowds, no indoor crowds, not even UFC crowds yet, but AEW was doing that in Jacksonville. We're going to sit and talk to the mayor about that. One other thing is the mayor has been meeting with Ken Shamrock over the last couple years, the UFC and WWE legend, to talk about his new venture, Valor BK, which we highlighted. If you want to go listen to episode 8 of Going Ringside right now, you can, where we sit down with Ken and talk about his new bare-knuckle boxing promotion that he's starting with a big footprint here in Jacksonville. He had a meeting with Mayor Curry, so we're going to talk to Mayor Curry about that as well. So just really, it's interesting during his 8 years in office that UFC, pro wrestling, this bare-knuckle boxing promotion, these are the types of things you see in Las Vegas or Atlantic City, New York, LA, but all of a sudden they've all started coming to this city in Northeast Florida. So I wanted to bring the mayor on to talk about how does this all happen? What's really gone on behind the scenes during these years when all these fighting organizations have come to Jacksonville? So here is our interview with Mayor Lenny Curry, and we'll follow it up with our interview with Austin Lane, the former Jacksonville Jaguar and NFLer who is debuting in a fight this Saturday for UFC. We'll talk to him about how he feels about the fight. So first, here's our interview with Jacksonville Mayor Lenny Curry. Well, we are thrilled to be joined by Jacksonville Mayor Lenny Curry to talk about this fighting world that has descended on your city. Mr. Mayor, thank you for joining us today.
Good to be here.
So you were almost totally complete with 8 years.
Yes.
You spent 8 years, and during your time in office, Jacksonville went from a city where we would have a fight or two, maybe once a year, a wrestling match here or there, to it seems like this whole world is centered on us, from UFC to pro wrestling to Ken Shamrock wants to do his bare knuckle boxing here.
We had a meeting about that a couple years ago.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that in a little bit. I want to start with UFC because that's happening now. That's happening Saturday. How did this Jacksonville relationship with UFC and Dana White start?
It all started during COVID. So, folks, what was that, 2020? Seems like an eternity ago.
Yeah.
And I remember I was watching it in the news. Dana White and UFC, under his leadership, were looking for a place to fight during COVID, to fight in a space where there wouldn't be an audience. And no one would let him do it. No state, no city. And I think, if I recall, they were even trying to go create an island that was going to be a fight island during COVID. I don't know exactly how they got in touch with us, but I got a request that Dana White was interested in filming indoors. And, I mean, we ran some protocols, and we said, this is a no-brainer. We have the space.
You say no-brainer. So this is, I think, 21 maybe. Everything is at height. NBA's in a bubble. 20.
It's 20. Yeah, this is in the height of it.
So NBA's in a bubble.
Yes.
NFL and college had kind of started doing some outdoor socially distanced game, but indoors with a crowd. Walk me through that decision.
Well, we did no crowd. In 2020, there was no crowd.
But eventually in 21, there was.
That's right.
Okay.
But let's talk about 2020, because there was a lot of criticism.
Yeah.
I mean, Dana got this, a lot of the sports media attacked him. And they're beautiful clips to watch if you go back and watch how he responded.
Okay.
Because he does not withhold his language. He's very honest, which is what I love about him. But then move on to 2021. And yes, everyone was in a bubble. The state of Florida, Jacksonville, had been open for quite some time. And we just felt it was time, you know, and it's not going to go without criticism. And we were willing to accept the criticism.
What do you mean by criticism?
Right.
When I mean you're sitting in the mayor's office, is this negative news reports, media hit pieces, calls to your office?
Primarily negative news. Particularly the risk you deal with is negative national news.
Yeah.
We saw that. We were the first to open our beaches. And we were mocked, specifically on CNN. They even put up false pictures that weren't even pictures that were actual happening.
Okay.
So anyway, we knew that risk was going to be involved with doing the first indoor event. And the night before, we did the first concert as well. We did a Machine Gun Kelly concert at Daly's place on Friday night.
And so you do the fight. How does it go? I mean, what's the mood like? I mean, are you talking to Dana? I mean, how did your relationship with Dana White start?
It started in 2020 when he came. I went and met with him.
Okay.
And we said hello, we exchanged numbers, and from there we started communicating from time to time.
And he was just looking for a place. I'm assuming like New York obviously is not California, he can't go to.
Everybody said no.
Really?
In 2020. And I'll tell you what else, and I'm reflecting now on this. In 21, he wanted to fight again, I believe, in Vegas. That's their hometown, right? That's their space.
Mm-hmm.
And no one in 21, when we said, he had always committed to coming back to Jacksonville, but he came back here first because we said yes. Mm-hmm. Once we said yes in 21, guess what started happening? Immediately he told me. Once they scheduled Jacksonville, all these other venues started saying, well, if they can do it, we can do it. My guess is they knew we were going to take all the front-end criticism and then...
It'd be easier.
Right.
The second one to do is not going to get the CNN hit piece.
That's right.
So you do this.
But really, I say for fans of whether they're fans that follow UFC closely or just a little bit, even if they don't, go watch the Dana White clips. You could Google them on him interacting with the media during COVID in 2020. They're beautiful. Do
you think Dana would have done it where an NBA commissioner, Adam Silver's, not going to do it, or hockey, or whatever the case may be? Was Dana specifically a guy who's like, I want this to happen?
Yes.
Over, you think, other sports commissioners?
I mean, I can't speak for other sports commissioners, but Dana was ready to go. We were a year into this, well over a year into this. We understood the risks. In my view, many of the sports teams kind of overreacted. Maybe not, I won't say overreacted when COVID started. None of us knew what we were dealing with, right? Mm-hmm. Anybody that says that any form of a lockdown was a wrong decision was not in a decision making. Every single governor, every single mayor made some decision to mitigate the effects of COVID before we understood how it was spread. At one point, we thought it was spread on counters and packages. All that turned out to be wrong, but we had to make decisions quickly. Once we had that year under our belt, we understood what was going on, and Dana understood what was going on, and it was time to go. I think other sports, other sports were slower to respond for fear of criticism.
So when the fight happens, did the criticism go up until the fight happens and then taper off immediately after it was over? I mean, do you recall it all?
I don't. I recall a lot of criticism leading up to the fight and even into that day and that evening. I don't recall afterwards. Maybe I just quit paying attention because the event was over and it was successful.
Were you frustrated? Did you second guess yourself?
No.
You didn't?
No.
Why not?
That was the right thing to do. And I didn't think, based on the information and data we had a year in, we didn't believe it was a big public health issue. People that wanted to be vaccinated had access to vaccines. And people that didn't want to be vaccinated, that was their decision. We've since learned, contrary to what public health officials initially told us, vaccinating oneself does not prevent spread. Remember, they told us that at one point, you'll recall. So if someone chose not to vaccinate themselves, that was a personal decision.
Was there concern at all just the nature of fighting? I mean, these are two people, blood is being shared, they're very close. Was that a concern at all?
I mean, I think that's up to the individual choice, right?
Yeah.
Professional athletes, they're going to make a decision. If I were a professional fighter, which I'm not, never have been, I would have absolutely chosen to get in the ring.
So 2020 happens. The one that I remember made a lot of headlines was, I think, 21.
Yeah.
When there was a crowd.
That's right.
That was the one where everyone was like, because that was beyond people in a building fighting. That was, I want to say, thousands of people. First time I think we had, AEW actually predated that. I want to get to that a little later. But let's
They go indoor live?
They did do indoor live, yeah. I don't know that the crowds were as big, but they predated. But when we see that image, I mean, there was a lot of concerns locally. Here we're covering it. Nationally, he's obviously covering it. What was that like?
We knew that was going to happen. Look, I've been through 8 years of public criticism. That comes with the job. But I'm not saying leaders should not be criticized. So it's just, we felt like we could do this in a safe way, and it was just time. And we're going to take the heat and take the arrows and move forward.
Were you worried about, let's say 10,000 people in a room together?
No.
You weren't?
No.
So this happens. Dana comes in. I think they've been here 4 years in a row now.
By the way, I would have been worried the year before.
You would have?
Because we didn't have we didn't have enough information.
Do you think that Jacksonville was the catalyst to restarting sports in some respects in this country?
First indoor professional sporting event in the world, yes, absolutely.
And do you think that that changed the perspective of the professional sporting world of Jacksonville as maybe a more desirable location?
I think so, but we're going to have to keep building on it.
What do you mean by that?
We're going to have to keep recruiting events. I mean, we can't just sit back and expect that that these opportunities are going to come to us. After 2020, Dana said during 2020, "Thank you for this. I'll come back." Well, we had to pick up the phone and ask for the return visit. I'll tell you how the 2022 event, the evolution of that. Well,
hang on. I want to stick on 21 for a second. So we're still on 21. You have the crowd. What is that like day of? Was there testing, or was just people just free for all come in?
My recollection is I know I was tested, and I spent a good part of the afternoon over at the event venue. Met. Did I meet Joe Rogan last year or the year before?
And was Joe Rogan at this one?
I don't recall seeing Joe Rogan at 21, so I just don't remember.
But if I remember right, there was a kind of a star-studded group that was there.
Tom Brady, Tim Tebow. I mean, there's a long list of people,
okay,
stars that showed up, and I'm pretty sure Joe Rogan was there.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody wanted to be there, right? They hadn't seen this professional sporting event in over a year.
Are you? Were you proud of your city for this? For being at the forefront of that? I'm talking in 21. I mean, because it's one thing to have an event with the fighters, but it's another thing to have your community come out to an event like this.
More than being proud of my city, I mean, I was proud of the people that helped put it on, but I was happy for my city. Frankly, I was happy for the country because people came from all over. They'd been bottled up in their homes. Many people from other states hadn't been to work. And I mean, the energy was unbelievable. Starting Friday night at the concert, Machine Gun Kelly concert, it was like popping a cork off of a champagne bottle. And it was the same, they kept popping, by the way. It was not one pop. You know, you get the pop and then you relax. This pop was like all night through UFC. The energy was insane.
So what's this like?
It was really good to see. Like, one of the things I enjoy is I enjoy seeing people have a good time.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm at a theme park or if I'm at a hotel vacation, I enjoy watching other people enjoy themselves. I've never seen that much joy in one place, and I think it's because people were just so bottled up. Everybody was having a good time.
So you do this, let's keep the COVID out of it. What's the fanboy in you like? I mean, we're getting these major fighters, you're getting Tom Brady and celebrities in your city for this big event. I mean, was this fun?
Well, I like sports.
Yeah.
You know, even if it's a sport that I don't follow. So I don't follow the NBA closely. If I saw an NBA player, I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So to have them here in our city, it made me smile. It made me kind of pinch myself. Well, hey, Joe Rogan. I'm talking to Joe Rogan?
Sure.
That's
I
cool.
saw you doing a lot of the fanboy pics on Twitter.
It was great.
How could you not?
And at the time, I had broken this bone.
Okay,
I had just had
that.
surgery.
Yep.
I had a bunch of metal put in, and so it looked like I'd been in a fight.
Yeah.
So the timing
worked out.
Interesting.
So you mentioned 22 and now in 23. So the relationship has continued.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this is 4 years in a row now.
Yeah. So December of 21, I was hunting overnight. And I was I think it was a Thursday night, because I remember I was in my room watching a Thursday night football game on my phone. And I thought, we need to get UFC back. So I shot a text to Dana that night, and I said, hey, brother, can we get UFC back? And he shot me a text back within minutes, which is he was at his Christmas party, a video of him and his Christmas party and the band that was performing. He said, this is what I'm doing right now. Contact my people. The next day we contacted him, and they scheduled it like that.
Wow.
Major event.
Do you think other cities would have it that easy, or do you think they like Jacksonville?
Well, I think they like Jacksonville. They raved about it when they were here, but they appreciate that we took a stand in 2020 when no one would let them do their business, and we opened our doors wide open and said, come on.
And Albuquerque, some medium-sized city in Ohio, do you think we have kind of put ourselves above those? I mean, above those medium-sized, smaller market NFL cities?
I think we're gonna have. Yeah, I think we have, but we're gonna have. We can't just rest on it. We're gonna have to keep working it. The city's going to have to continue to work for these types of events.
So in addition,
but I think we now have a case.
And I want to get to facilities.
That UFC event in 21 was the largest event that our arena's held, both in terms of people and in terms of revenue generated.
So
It was
I want to
historical.
talk about facilities in a little bit, but there's another half of this conversation. While you've been in office, some other fighting organization has happened in our city. Shad Khan's son, Tony, was given $100 million to start a national pro wrestling organization in Jacksonville.
Yes.
Were you aware of that? I mean,
Yes.
that kind of came in 2019, and I as a journalist didn't know it was coming until it was announced.
Yes.
I mean, what have your thought on that?
I think it's an amazing success story. I knew that, I communicate with Todd, with Shad. I spent time with him. So I knew that Tony had this idea and that the investment was going to be made. I wasn't aware of the size of the investment. And they didn't know where it was headed. I say they, Shad was the investor, but Tony had a dream and a vision, and it has exceeded every expectation. It's a very successful business, and it's cool that it started here.
Let me hit the pandemic for a second. So when the pandemic happens, everything's shut down. They're a pro wrestling company. They're trying to go on the road again and be in Chicago and LA, and they can't. And they moved all their shows to Daly's Place. Every week I would hear their announcers on national television say, "Welcome to Jacksonville, Florida."
Yes.
Do you think that, in addition to the UFC, kind of helped?
Yeah, and now thinking back, my guess is UFC saw that there were AEW events happening.
Yeah, and they were having crowds before UFC.
Right.
Yeah.
But they saw, my guess is they saw it during COVID, even without crowds. They probably saw that and said, hey, we ought to check this city out.
And you think that helped?
Yeah. And by the way, we didn't do this in a silo. We had to work with the governor, Governor DeSantis, and his office.
Yeah, tell me about that. So this state level is in this too.
Absolutely, because of the department, whatever regulates this. I can't remember the name of the department at this time. We were in communication with them. We were in communication with the governor. We wanted to make sure that the governor was going to be comfortable with us doing these events in 2020, even without crowds. And right away, he was like, let's do it.
So the fact that there's so much focus on the city versus 10 years ago, do you think Jacksonville's in a different place in the national eye? Big
time. Absolutely. I mean, I think, and a number of things contribute to that. This stuff that's happened recently, I think, there's some fans do not like that we play a game in London. I understand that. Yeah. But London has certainly helped elevate our brand as a city as well. It's also been good for the team in terms of stabilizing its long-term presence here. So yeah, I think more eyes are on Jacksonville than have ever been.
Well, let's talk about facilities. So you mentioned that was the biggest event that the arena had ever had. And we're right now, and it's not really going to be on you anymore, is a new stadium. Obviously, when people hear new stadium, they think Jaguars, they think football.
Right.
Are there other opportunities if we get a new state-of-the-art stadium for things like a major UFC event? I mean, Tony Khan might do a 70,000 thing at Wembley Stadium in London later this summer. Do you think there are other opportunities beyond just football with a new stadium?
Yeah, Mark has said that. This is more than just about playing football games in the new facility. You could be talking about the draft.
You're talking about Mark Lamping, the president of the Jaguars.
President of the Jaguars. You're talking about NFL draft. You're talking about potentially a Super Bowl at some point. You're talking about college football, their college football events. You're talking about concerts, large concerts that can fill stadiums.
And if Dana White someday says, hey, we think we can sell out a 50,000 person crowd, you think they'd look at us?
I would make the phone call, even being out of this office.
You would?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you think that...
I'd make the pitch.
Big events in the fighting, wrestling world, wherever, Jacksonville would be a good option.
Absolutely. And I think it's important that, and it's also important for the Florida-Georgia, Georgia-Florida games, longevity here as well.
2021, I saw some images on Twitter of you, and I didn't know what they were. I recognized two of the three people in the shot. It was you and Ken Shamrock, a former fighter and former pro wrestler, and I had no idea what it was until we saw. Ken is on episode 8 of Going Ringside right now. If you want to go watch the episode with Ken about Valor BK, Valor Bare Knuckle, going to do a lot of events in Jacksonville, a new fighting league that Ken Shamrock is doing. So go check out episode 8 right now. But so tell me about that. I didn't know what that was, and I see you two meeting together. What happened there?
Ken was advocating for legislation. So at that time, it was illegal to fight bare knuckle.
Okay.
I think they've passed the legislation that's now legalized it. When I met with him, they were pursuing that. So he wanted to talk about could we help with the Florida legislature and the governor He was there to educate us on why it's safe, and then also interested at some point in doing events here in Jacksonville. And his argument makes sense. I mean, look, I'm not an expert at this, but he points out that when guys fight bare knuckle, they have to really pick their punches. Because if you land a punch in the wrong spot recklessly, you're going to break your hand, and you're done, right? So it's safer for the fighters because you're not getting a bunch of random shots to the head. But I want to be clear. I love the gloved fighting. I love UFC.
Sure.
He's just making the case as to why bare knuckle should also be an option.
So going forward, when I think fights, boxing, UFC, wrestling to a point, I think Atlantic City, I think Las Vegas. Is Jacksonville moving into that conversation?
We are moving, but we're going to have to keep pursuing it. So you mentioned the picture you saw, right?
Yep.
The number of meetings and phone calls that happen, we're always prospecting and sourcing. I mean, I had a call a year or so ago with the commissioner of hockey, NHL. And it's not that first conversation goes somewhere, but it's saying, we're Jacksonville, we're interested on any professional sport, and is there an opportunity? And so I would encourage the next administration, the mayor-elect, and her team to, and we'll pass the baton on these relationships, to work them, to pursue, to talk.
You've done a lot of things while you were mayor. I don't want to get into those. That's not what this podcast is about. But has the fighting stuff been fun?
It's been an absolute blast, yes. But again, I think the best part about it was seeing so many people in a place having a good time. And those fans are serious.
Yeah.
I mean, they come from all over.
You following what's going on this weekend in Jacksonville, the UFC fight?
I will be there.
You will be there?
I will absolutely be there.
So excited?
My family will be there.
Okay.
Friends, yeah, I'm very excited about it. And just really looking forward to it.
Well, Jacksonville Mayor Lenny Curry, thank you for your time. We appreciate it. This was a fun conversation.
Thank you. I would encourage folks, I think you can still get some tickets.
Okay.
It's going to be a full house, but if I've told people, if you're not a fan, if you've never even watched it on TV, just try it. You'll love it.
Got it. Well, thank you,
Thank
Mayor
you.
Curry. We appreciate it. And now, treat. We also get to sit down with Austin Lane. Austin is a former Jacksonville Jaguar, NFL star, making his fight debut. Here's our interview with Austin Lane. Well, we are excited to be joined now by Austin Lane, making his UFC debut this weekend after a prominent NFL career for all those years. Austin, thanks for joining us today.
God, man, I appreciate you. Thank you for having me on, man.
Talk to me about this weekend. Are you excited? Butterflies? This is your big debut.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a huge opportunity ahead of me. You know, this has been a pretty long journey for me to get here. You know, there's been some ups and some downs, but it's all part of the fight game. And to be able to showcase my skill set, to showcase my hard work, my dedication in front of a fan base that started when I started playing for the Jaguars, it means absolutely everything to me. So as far as nerves, not really, man. I'm going to have a giant smile on my face going in there because to me, it's like one giant playground. I love this sport. I love this game. I love this lifestyle. And I'm excited to showcase that this Saturday.
So when you were in the NFL, after the NFL, how does it go from NFL to fighting? What was that decision-making process like?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, one of the easiest decisions I ever made in my entire life. I started training, you know, boxing and MMA back in 2012 when I was playing for the Jaguars upon the advice of my defensive line coach, Joe Cohen. You know, he wanted all his defensive linemen to get, you know, better hands per se. So, you know, I found an MMA gym. We worked on boxing a lot. And from there, I fell in love with it so much that every off season I would go back to that gym, you know, and just try to work on my skills a little more. Well, it got to the time when I was playing in Chicago my final year, you know, where I told myself, listen, if this game ever stops being fun and it starts to feel like a job, I would walk away and I'd pursue MMA. And that's exactly what I did, you know, and I think in the long run, I think it was the right decision. There's a lot of guys out there that don't really have a fallback plan or something to run to after the NFL. Thankfully, MMA was in my back pocket the entire time. So that transition for me was pretty easy.
What's the difference between facing off with an offensive tackle and an MMA fighter?
Man, that's a great question. You know what? There is a lot of, I mean, it's pretty similar. I would say at the end of the day, though, obviously wearing pads and a helmet on that field. In MMA, one shot, it's a little different, right? Yeah. And, you know, the thing with football, too, is if you make one mistake, okay, well, you have to go back to the huddle, play next play. In MMA, one mistake can cost you everything.
Sure. So you are facing Justin Tapa this weekend. Thoughts on the fight from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the UFC knows exactly what they're doing in terms of setting these fights up. I mean, he's got 6 finishes, and those are all by KO. And I have 12 finishes, and 11 of those are by KO, and one's by choke. So, yeah, I mean, when you got 2 big guys in there throwing leather, it's bound to be fireworks. So, obviously, we have the game plan in place. No disrespect, Scott. I'm not going to tell you what that game plan is, but it's going to be a fun matchup. He's a very great fighter. I have a lot of respect for him and what he's all about. And I just have to go out there and execute my game plan, and we'll be all good.
I talked to some fighters who say fighting is different than other types of, barbarian-like sports, maybe like NFL, where it can be over quickly. And with NFL, you're kind of putting your body through a lot for 60 minutes. Yeah. Is there a difference there in as far as the wear and tear on the body?
Yeah, I mean, I've been asked this question a lot. And when people want to say, like, what's more grueling, the NFL or just playing football in general or fighting? I mean, to me, it's not even close. The NFL is a lot worse as far as I'm concerned. Now, but you remember who you're talking to, though, right? Like, I came from the camp when we had like real 2-a-days, but we're practicing 2 times a day in full pads. Those times have changed a little bit, but you want to talk about even in a game, if you're in the trenches and you're playing 60 plays or 70 plays, I mean, every time that you go after that offensive tackle, your heads are getting collided and everything. It can take its toll, on your body, as opposed to MMA where, yeah, obviously we're sparring, we're punching in the face, but it's not an every single day kind of thing. Like when I spar hard, I might be sparring hard maybe once or twice at the very maximum. Unlike practice with football where every single day you got to go and get that contact in. So in terms of the way you feel on your body and your mind, I think the NFL is a lot worse.
You could be fighting in Atlantic City. You could be fighting in Las Vegas, Los Angeles, but you're in Jacksonville. Yeah. A city you're very familiar with. What do you think about that? Was that by design? Is that luck of the draw?
No, I mean, it definitely wasn't by design. I was supposed to make my UFC debut. That would have been in February, and then I ended up tearing my bicep. I was supposed to fight in Australia. Tore my bicep off the bone, and then obviously, the rest is history. Now we're fighting here.
Has that healed, and will that be a problem?
Yeah. So, when I tore it, they told me 5 to 6 months, but they didn't know who they're dealing with because I was back in 3 months. And then to my rehab team, to my doctors and everything, they did a great job of getting me back together and get me back to 100%. But needless to say, no, it all just literally worked out, and it's due to hard work coming back early from an injury and all that stuff. And now I'm reaping the benefits of fighting in my hometown here in Jacksonville.
Well, Austin Lane, thank you so much for joining us, and good luck out there.
Scott, man, I appreciate it, dude. Stay casual, man. We'll talk to you later.
So that was our interview with Jacksonville Mayor Lenny Curry and Austin Lane talking about his fight. But Austin Lane is not the only fighter involved in this UFC event who we're talking to. The other one is Josh Emmett, 5th in the world is how UFC ranks him. He's coming up to fight against Ilia Topuria. It's going to be a tough fight. Our own Justin Barney, News4Jax sports editor, sat down with Josh Emmett to talk to him about how he feels about getting here to Jacksonville and his big fight this weekend. So here's our interview with number 5 in the world, Josh Emmett.
I've only been to Florida once, and that was Orlando. So I don't know a whole lot about Jacksonville besides the Jaguars playing there. And I'm looking forward to it though. First and foremost, I want to go out there, get my hand raised on June 24th. And then, my wife and I and friends are the biggest foodies. So I just want to kind of, if there's any sites that I need to check out in Jacksonville or the beaches and definitely the food and craft cocktails and some good wine, I'll need some recommendations.
Are you a wine guy, a bourbon guy? What kind of food are you into?
Yeah, no, all types of food, but I do like instead of just like junk food, it's like I do like I like some all types of cuisine I like, but I do like some fine dining and just like the culinary experience. And then I'm a big red wine drinker, but I love bourbon and things like that as well. So I do not discriminate. I love it all.
Yeah, you'll have to wait till after you fight do you have any time left in town after you're done fighting to decompress?
Yeah, always. Wherever I fight, I always take a handful a day. So I think I go back sometime midweek the following week. So I just plan on just kind of taking in the city and the culture and just hopefully interacting with some fans and just doing it all.
It's awesome because the last time we had a fight night card here was back in. We've since had two UFC cards, but the last time fight night was here was during the pandemic, and we had no fans. And so this is a chance for the local crowd to see a little bit of fight night action and a top contender too. So with you moving up, I mean, a win in this situation would vault you pretty close to possibly a title shot, maybe end of this year, possibly next year. That's what you're looking at.
Yeah, you never know. I just kind of keep it one fight at a time. So there's only 4 people ranked in front of me in the world. I'm fighting behind me this time against Ilya, but he's a good fighter. He's a tough fighter. He's young. He's hungry. He's confident. So first and foremost, I just have to go out there, get my hand raised, and then I'll cross that bridge when we get there. But I do feel like I'll be right back in the same position I was just in. You never know. My next fight could be possibly for a title eliminator, or you never know with the state of the division and where people are at with injuries and opportunities pop up here and there. You just always have to be ready. But I have to go and beat Ilya first. Otherwise, none of that matters.
With you being a guy, you've got more than 24 professional fights to your credit, and you're talking a younger guy too in that situation. How do you approach a fight like that where it's a younger guy? I mean, is it different fighting a veteran like yourself or a younger guy? How do you compare and contrast the two chasms of fighters there?
Yeah, it's just different. You never know. This sport is it's a wild ride, but it's like I don't know till I get in there. I always say I like to get in there. I like to, and it sounds crazy, but like I like to get hit by them just to see how fast they are, see how hard they hit. Once we kind of get in a clinch, I'll feel how strong he is. So you never know. I always give my opponents the utmost respect because I watch a lot of film on them. I see what they've done in the past, but I don't know until I get in there. So it's just every single fighter is different. I could answer that question at the end of the night on June 24th, but if it was the toughest fight of my life or the easiest fight of my life. But yeah, I've been there, so I have the experience on my side. I've fought a lot of guys that are similar to him, same body style, well-rounded fighters, just like he is. I was also, young and undefeated before I got in the UFC, and when I was in the UFC for a little while. So it's like I feel like I know how he feels, like how he's thinking and carries himself. So I'll take the experience all day, and he's never fought anyone like me.
The last time UFC was here, 2 guys in your division headlined it that night, Zombie and Volkanovski, and it was just the atmosphere was electric, and being in there and seeing the fans and how passionate it was down here. Combat sports in Jacksonville has just exploded, and the sellout crowds down here. When you're fighting in a different place, do you feed? I mean, I know different athletes and sports and stuff feel differently about the crowd. You tune it out or whatever. But as a fighter, do you feed off of that? Do you absolutely take that in, or are you just locked in and don't even notice the crowd?
Yeah, no, I definitely notice the crowd, and I'm happy to be fighting in front of a crowd. This fight was supposed to be in Vegas at the Apex. I always have so much friends and family that come out to my fights. So they were going to be in Vegas even if they couldn't get into the Apex. And now everyone can go. And I do like feed off the energy of the crowd. When I get into exchanges and they're screaming and it's electrifying in there, and it does push me to go a little harder and get that finish. So I do love it, even though I am so focused and just zoned in, but I hear everything. I listen to my coaches, I listen to my opponent's coaches. I can hear my old high school and college wrestling coaches in the crowd. I've played sports and wrestled my whole life and through the 4-year level. So it's like, I'm a very coachable guy. So I just, I hear it all, but I do feed off that energy as well.
I know it's presumptuous to look ahead, but do you have a year plan, 2-year plan, 18-month plan as a fighter, or do you truly just take it one day at a time, one round at a time?
Yeah, no, I definitely have goals set and plans that I want to do. And, like as far as like from like my personal life, business life, all these type of things. But as far as fighting goes, yeah, I want to stay as active as possible. I want to fight as consistently as possible, stay in the gym, just stack up a handful of wins. And then, the better I'm doing, the better, my group and my wife and my mom and family and everyone does. So, yeah, so I have multiple goals, but they're all in different areas, and always trying to, learn and educate myself in different areas as well. And just become a, better fighter, better husband, better son, better friend, just everything, just keep evolving. You can never stay stagnant.
So glad Justin was able to sit down with Josh Emmett to go over his thoughts on the fight. 5th in the world right now. So let's kind of talk about, before we bring Justin Barney in to help us break down the card and how he sees it going. Here's kind of the main matches that you can expect Saturday. Josh Emmett, who you just spoke with, 5th in the world versus Ilia Topuria, ranked 9th. Topuria is from the country of Georgia in Eastern Europe. For the women's flyweight bout, you have Macy Barber, ranked 11th, and she's from the U.S., versus Amanda Ribas from Brazil. She is ranked 9th in the world. The heavyweight bout that we talked about, former NFL star Austin Lane stepping in the squared circle with Justin Tafa, who's from New Zealand. And the featherweight bout you've got from Uganda, David Onama and versus Gabriel Santos out of Brazil. And then finally on the middleweight bout on the headline cards, you've got from the U.S. number 13 ranked Brendan Allen versus unranked Bruno Silva from Brazil. So a stacked card. So I want to sit down, particularly about that main match and the Austin Lane match. I want to sit down with News for Jack sports editor Justin Barney to kind of break this down. He's our UFC fight guru. Here's our interview with Justin Barney. Well, now we are joined by UFC expert sports editor Justin Barney to talk a little about, break down some of these fights. And we just heard about from Josh Emmett. So, Justin, I want to start with Josh Emmett, Ilia Topuria. How do you see this fight going down? It's
going to be a banging fight. Josh Emmett, if you've seen him fight before, he is a slammer. He likes to get in, trade, bang. And, this is a big fight for Josh because he's coming off a loss to Yair Rodriguez and for an interim title shot. And Yair ended up beating him, and now he's going to get a crack at Alexander Volkanovski, Alexander the Great. So Alexander the Great actually fought here the last time the UFC promotion was in town, beat the Korean Zombie. So there's all kinds of little intricate parts to the UFC.
So Emmett Topuria, who do you predict winning this one?
Oh, it's tough. It's a step up in competition for Mr. Topuria. He's not fought a guy like Josh Emmett, and for Josh, it's almost a last, in a sense, the last kind of step up. I mean, this is for him. He can't lose 2 in a row in the UFC if you still want to be mentioning that. I'm going to take Josh Emmett just because I think he's the veteran. Of course, Mr. Topuria has not fought a fighter of Josh's caliber. He's 13-0, but he has not kind of fought that upper crust of UFC greats like Josh Emmett has.
So let's talk about Austin Lane, former Jacksonville Jaguar. We've seen mixed results from NFL stars who go into the fighting world. Bob Sapp is probably the most famous one who struggled, who comes to mind, and others. How do you see this going?
Yeah, Greg Hardy is another one. He was a very famous football player, and he had a good start in MMA and has since struggled and tapered off. It's just different when you get out there. You see it in a CM Punk kind of situation. You go from one venue to the other, and it's going to be a challenge.
I talked to UFC legend Dan Severn about that. He was with an interview that'll be coming up on coming weeks on Going Ringside, where he kind of mocks CM Punk's attempt at it. So it's funny that you should mention that. So before we go, I want to talk to you about Jacksonville, and we talked to the mayor earlier in this episode about Jacksonville and UFC. Have they really bonded, like the UFC, the MMA? Ken Shamrock's got his Valor BK doing a lot in Jacksonville. Why do you think the fighting world has descended on this city so much?
If you look at the UFC in Jacksonville and UFC in Florida, in general, it starts back pandemic-wise. Country was shut down for 2 months, essentially, and Governor Ron DeSantis, Mayor Lenny Curry, talked to Dana White about opening the state back up, and they had three nights of fights in Jacksonville. They had no fans here, but again, it was a segue into great things. This is the 4th year in a row that UFC has been here. And Jacksonville, if you look back in the history, is a little kind of a hot spot for combat sports. A lot of it boxing. Roy Jones has fought here.
I want to ask you, so historically, when you think of big fight cities, you think of obviously Las Vegas, Los Angeles and New York are always going to be in there because they're LA and New York, and maybe some of the other major cities. How do you see Jacksonville nationally now? Do you think we're up there with the Vegas of the world?
No, not quite yet. I mean, you've got a steady influx. I mean, 4 years in a row, UFC has come here. Jacksonville's got a rich boxing tradition if we wind the clock back even prior to UFC.
And pro wrestling. And pro wrestling. With what's going on with Tony Khan.
It's muscling its way into the conversation. It's almost like the Jaguars. You trying to muscle your way into being in NFL town back in '95. Thought it was a long shot. Jacksonville gets the Jaguars, and I think Jacksonville
would you say we're a top 10, top 5 city for fights?
I would not yet. I think you're maybe top 15 at this point. I don't think you're top 10, but I think the AEW keeps going. You keep bringing UFCs here every year. This is a little different. It's a fight night. It's not an actual UFC, main card, UFC 290, anything like that. But you're muscling your way in there. You're getting repetition. You're never going to be a Vegas or Atlantic City type of promotion, but you are going to, again, get something here, keep it coming here, keep it flowing in Jacksonville.
So while we've been talking, I've been thinking about something. UFC's merging with WWE. Their competitor is Tony Khan's organization, AEW. Do you think there will be any sort of problems with that, or do you think that UFC is kind of its own entity and doesn't really care what AEW does?
Yeah, I don't think UFC cares what AEW. I mean, the brand of UFC and WWE stands alone at the top of their respective realms. You've got other fight leagues that are around. Shamrock is trying to get in the fight business. I don't think AEW has taken a little bit of the feelers away from WWE, but I don't think UFC is going to be hindered by other promotions. I don't think they look at AEW as a serious competitive rival to WWE. But I do like the crossover appeal between UFC and WWE. We've seen it, heard from Ken Shamrock about it, and I do like that crossover appeal.
And thank you for that, because we are going to, in an upcoming episode, Ken Shamrock, Dan Severn, and Butterbean all sit down with us, 3 legendary fighters. So look for that on Going Ringside in coming weeks. Justin, Barney, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Love talking wrestling and fighting and everything.
Thanks, Justin.
Thanks.
So that was our conversation with Justin. And once again, Butterbean, Shamrock, Severn all together on stage with us in an upcoming episode in the very near future. But now that we've looked at the fight, I want to talk about something else on our episode today, and that is a new, very popular podcast. If you listen to podcasts in Jacksonville, this is probably one you should check out, or if you're in Florida, in the region. It's called Jenerally Sepaking. I talked about it a little at the top of the show. Jenerally is spelled with a J instead of a G like you would commonly think. It's based off the host name, Jennifer Janao, and it is becoming really the go-to podcast in Northeast Florida that people are just flocking to try and get on as it grows in popularity, talking about everything from health and wellness to the nightlife in Jacksonville. So we sat down with the host, Jennifer Janao, to talk about, what her show's all about, how she came up with this idea, and it seems to just keep growing. So we wanted a chance to hear about it here on Going Ringside. Here's our interview with Jenerally Sepaking host, Jennifer Janao. Well, we're excited to be joined now by something we really want to get out there more, and that is some Jacksonville-based podcasts. We are joined now by Jennifer Janao, host of the Jenerally Sepaking podcast. Now, generally, you think of spelled with a G. On her show, it's spelled with a J. So look up the word Jenerally with a J, Speaking, the podcast. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us. Tell me all about the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really blessed to be here, so I really thank you for having me on here. Jenerally Sepaking, I've done it for about a year now. I started this podcast because since I've been in Jacksonville, I've met so many amazing people and individuals and business owners. And throughout the years and going through college, JU, UNF, I really wanted to showcase these amazing people that have influenced my life for the better. And I think Jacksonville gets a lot of bad rep for a lot of things, you know, but it is an amazing, diverse, and cultural city.
What are some of the things you have on the show? I'm sure it's a variety of things.
Yeah, so it's a generally, speaking thing. So topics are free form, and, there's no restraints on our topics, but I have local creatives, talents, and businesses on there. And I showcase how they're affecting our community in Jacksonville the best way. So, topics, I've had musicians on there, chefs, bartenders. I've had a Jack's Beach, a local council member on there,
okay.
So anyone and everyone is welcome on my show.
So at the end of this interview, we're going to talk about where you can find the podcast, but I do want to ask about people if they want to come on your show. How would they get in touch with you?
So you can look up my social media on Instagram, Facebook. Just message me directly, or my brand manager, Josie Valentine, and she has everything on Facebook, Instagram. You can email us.
Spell the name they're looking. Spell Janao so our viewers know exactly what to look for on Instagram.
Yeah. So on Instagram, my name is Jennifer Janao. It's Genao.
And that's how they'd find you there. And tell me where people can hear the podcast if they want to.
Generally Speaking is available on all major platforms. So you can find it Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and all the smaller podcasts or platforms as well.
Is it hard to start a podcast? I'm kind of learning this myself here on Going Ringside. It's just a new venture, and did you just decide to do it on your own?
Yeah, it's I really did. So when I had this idea, I actually for about a year was in this kind of idle space. I wanted it to be my own, but I kept procrastinating the start of it because I was doing everything myself. I got all the equipment for it. I was learning all the videos and how to edit. 'Cause it's not just pushing a button, and you want it to look as professional as possible. So eventually, after that year, I reached out to someone who could help me just get it started. And his name is Gary, and I thank him so much. And so he provided me with a studio space. And that's when it kickstarted, and everything from there was a lot easier. But
why a podcast for you? Is that something you wanted to do? Did you think of that through college? How did that come about?
So I thought of that a couple of years ago. When I went to college, I never had thought about it. No, but when I stopped going to school and I was working and traveling, meeting all these great people, I was trying to think of the best way to showcase these people, and I get all the time my voice is good for radio.
You've got a radio voice, absolutely, yep.
Yeah, so, and I decided to, and I used to be very insecure about my voice too.
Really?
Yeah, okay. I was bullied for my voice being very deep as a woman, and so, you know what, I took that into my own hands and I turned it into a positive thing, and I was like, I'm gonna use that to my advantage and make a podcast out of it.
So it's going well. Jennifer Janao with a Jenerally with a J Speaking podcast on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, look up Jenerally Speaking. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, of course. Thank you. Of course.
So we appreciate Jennifer coming on to talk to us about the very popular podcast that just keeps growing here. As we hope ours does, continue to share it and tell people about it. Going Ringside. They can check us out once again on Instagram, at TikTok, at Going Ringside. And we, of course, are available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube and newsforjacks.com. So thanks for joining us in this trip down the world of UFC today and its real big impact here in Northeast Florida. So it's been a fun episode. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Going Ringside.
This has been Going Ringside with the local station, brought to you every Wednesday on your favorite podcast player, on News4 Jax Plus, as well as the News4 Jax YouTube channel.